Hey there, Dolphins fans. Tom Downey here to take a look at some potential draft targets in round one on offense for the Miami Dolphins. Now, as a reminder, and as I'm sure you guys all know, Dolphins have 2 first-round picks this year. And if you're trying to build around your potential young franchise quarterback in Tua, it probably makes sense to spend at least one of those picks on that side of the ball. Now, you're not going to go quarterback. You're probably not going to go tight end unless things get really weird, but which means you're likely looking then at 3 different position groupings. Wide receiver, potentially running back, which we'll discuss later, and then offensive line as well. We're going to go through a bunch of different prospects, some with that earlier first-round pick or trading down a little bit, and some with the later first-round pick. Before we do that, though, if you guys also want a defensive draft targets video, I need you guys to like today's video. If we can get to, say, around 500 or so, that will make it a little bit easier for me and Mitch to pitch the bosses on doing even more draft stuff. So if you want draft targets on defense, hit that like button. Wide receiver, an area of need for the Miami Dolphins this offseason, and picking number 3 overall, well, there just so happens to be 3 very intriguing options for Miami to at least consider with that pick, or even trading down and stick in the top 10 and still get one of those guys. The 2 Alabama prospects, Devonta Smith and Jaylen Waddle, and then Ja'Marr Chase from LSU. We'll break down each of those guys here in just a second. But when you look at where the Dolphins sit on offense with the receiving core, you have Devontae Parker and then a bunch of other guys who played or opted out, if you're Albert Wilson, for example, who were fine-ish. Preston Williams, Lynn Bowden, Jakeem Grant, Malcolm Perry. You can keep those guys, but I think the Dolphins are searching for a more dynamic option to at least be wide receiver 2 going forward. Let's begin with the one heavily connected to Miami. That is Devonta Smith, who spent his Senior Bowl interviewing with the Dolphins coaches. The Heisman Trophy winner was, simply put, well, unstoppable this past year for the Crimson Tide. He is a fantastic route runner with great hands as well. The thing that gives you concern, though, is that he doesn't have great top-end speed, and he's particularly undersized. He played at under 180 pounds, and the list of players who were that small and had success in the NFL is very, very short, especially if you're not a top-end athlete. Ja'Marr Chase, next up here, the LSU product, opted out after simply dominating the 2019 season, part of that Joe Burrow-led LSU Tigers offense. He's not an elite separator necessarily, but he's awesome in contested catches. He's very strong after the catch. And oh, by the way, he just turned 21 in March, meaning, folks, he did the bulk of his damage before he even turned 20. That's kind of a big deal. The other Bama product now, Jaylen Waddle, who, by the way, under the radar, I think to some extent, was actually outproducing Devonta Smith before Waddle got hurt in that ankle injury, and I think it was pretty clear probably shouldn't have tried to come back and play in that national championship game. He did not look right out there. But unlike Chase and Smith, he offers truly game-breaking speed and is, I think, at least one of, if not the outright fastest player in this year's draft class. If you want a home run threat, look no further than Waddle. All 3 of these guys are legitimate round 1 prospects, and I think it'd be pretty tough to be upset if the Dolphins got either of these 3 options. Do you want the productive guy this past year? That's Devonta Smith. 2019, Ja'Marr Chase. Jaylen Waddle is the more dynamic and I would say fearful of the 3 options. So pick one for me, knowing there really isn't a wrong answer. Who would you rather have on the Dolphins? Type S for Devonta Smith, type C for Ja'Marr Chase, or type W for Jaylen Waddle. Some other receiver prospects I did want to mention, kind of more in the, hey, if you don't go receiver at 3, who could be on the board with that other first-round pick, or even maybe sliding into the back end of round 1 if you want to move up for somebody. Terrace Marshall from LSU, Kadarius Toney out of Florida, Rashod Bateman out of Minnesota, and Rondale Moore from Purdue. Now, there's some inconsistencies in all of these guys' games. Terrace Marshall flashed a lot this year and then kind of opted out quickly. Kadarius Toney had the best year of these guys, also a bit of a one-year wonder with some off-the-field stuff that had popped up previously in his time at Florida. Rashod Bateman had a great 2019, but also wasn't as good this year. Rondale Moore was off the charts good in 2018, but hasn't really been able to stay healthy. All those guys do make some sense, though, at the back end of round 1 if the Dolphins don't go receiver at number 3 overall. So who is your guys' top draft target on offense then? Is it one of those receivers? Is it a different position we'll get to here in just a second? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. This question will be the pinned comment, so go speak your mind right now. Let's look at running back for the Miami Dolphins and how they could address that early in the 2021 NFL Draft. With what they have right now, yeah, they got decent enough play out of Gaskin and Breida, and the Jordan Howard signing wasn't, frankly, unmitigated disaster. If you're the Dolphins, at some point in the NFL Draft, unless you sign a big-time guy in free agency, you're going to need to pursue an early round draft target. So as it relates to round 1, not at number 3, and then with that second first-round pick, there are some options, 2 of them to be exact, who make some sense. Let's begin with the guy that Tua has said he wants to have on his team, Najee Harris. It makes sense, by the way, that Tua wants to bring back his buddy from Alabama. Najee this year, folks, took a massive step forward. The guy we saw in 2018 was not the same as the guy we saw in 2020. He showed significantly more big playability and more pass-catching value. Now, he's still not a true home run, game-breaking threat. There weren't nearly as many big plays as some other backs in this year's class. And he is already 23. But if you want a reliable runner who I think fits what the Dolphins want to do on offense, Harris makes some sense. The other potential round 1 guy is Travis Etienne out of Clemson. Now, he offers more big play ability and more speed than Najee Harris does. He's also shown growth as a pass catcher. He's also younger than Harris is. I think his 2019 campaign was better than the 2020 version, although a part of that is because the Clemson offensive line wasn't nearly as good. In fact, in terms of yards before contact, Etienne had a whole yard less this year than last year. That is a lot. So based only on 2020, Najee Harris was the better football player, especially on the ground. But if you want the big playability, if you want the outside runs and the home run threat, I think you'd rather have Travis Etienne. So pick one for me in the comments section. If you could only take one of these guys, who would it be? Type H for Najee Harris or type in E for Travis Etienne. Couple other names I wanted to at least mention briefly. I don't want to take any of these guys in round 1, but I do think they could make some sense as a potential, maybe early even round 2 or beyond prospect there. Javonte Williams, Michael Carter, both from North Carolina. I don't mind Javonte to Miami in round 2. Kenneth Gainwell was super productive before he opted out at Memphis. Trey Sermon, his last couple games drastically boosted his draft stock. Meanwhile, Chuba Hubbard went in the exact wrong direction after a not-so-great 2020 campaign for Oklahoma State. Folks, it is nearly St. Patrick's Day, so if you want to get yourself some Dolphins gear with a St. Patrick's Day twist, and it looks great with the green, of course, head over to chatsports.com/DolphinsGreen. I will make sure that link gets put both in the comments section and in the description of today's video. That way, if you go anywhere for St. Patrick's Day, be it this year or next year or the year after that, because, come on, you don't just buy stuff for one use, right? You can get a fantastic Dolphins-themed St. Patrick's Day gear item. That's available at chatsports.com/DolphinsGreen. We're taking a look at some Miami Dolphins draft targets here, and on this part, let's take a look at the offensive line in general. And there are a bunch of different routes the Dolphins could hypothetically go in terms of adding players. Obviously, Ted Karras, the center, is a free agent, but you spent a first-round pick on Austin Jackson. You paid Eric Flowers decent money. You drafted Robert Hunt and Michael Dieter and Solomon Kinley, but those guys have some position flex. So I think at some level, or of course could be cut if you're Flowers, at some level, I would argue almost every single offensive line position is a potential upgrade area for the Dolphins. That's why I got 5 different players. I'm focusing in on here that number 3 overall pick, the number 18 overall pick. Penei Sewell out of Oregon, Rashawn Slater from Northwestern, Christian Darrisaw from Virginia Tech, Alijah Vera-Tucker out of USC, and Landon Dickerson out of Alabama. 3 offensive tackles because that's the premium pick, beginning with Penei Sewell. At number 3 overall, if you're not going to trade down, if you're not going to go receiver, I think he's the obvious selection then. The top offensive lineman in this year's class, he opted out of the 2020 season. He does not even turn 21 years old until October. That is some Tyron Smith type stuff there. He allowed 1 sack in 2 years at Oregon, all while being, in most cases, significantly younger than the guys he was going up against. Now, the Pac-12 does not have great pass rushers, but in terms of getting the best player on the board, Sewell might actually be the case there at number 3. Now, I don't like Rashawn Slater very much at that number 3 overall spot, but if the Dolphins were to trade down, or if he slides to pick 18 for them, Slater does make some sense. He fared incredibly well against Chase Young back in 2019. He didn't really get beat by him at all. Now, there are some length concerns and some size concerns overall. I think he's better at tackle, but some NFL teams will go, yeah, he's a guard or heck, maybe even a center. But if you're Miami, you can find a way to get that guy on your team. Christian Darrisaw is next up here. I think in terms of play style, he fits a little bit more of what your typical right tackle is, where he's someone who is going to be more of a road grader in the run game. He made Chaz Surratt hate his life altogether against North Carolina because he bullied him consistently. Had a massive breakout season this year, allowed 0 sacks, 0 hits, and just 6 hurries in total. Now, part of that was because Virginia Tech's offense kind of protected him in the sense that they didn't take a lot of deep shots downfield, so it was an easier pass-blocking offense, if that makes sense for you guys. But if he's there at 18, I think you could take him. You could maybe, with Tua being a lefty, put him at left tackle, kick Austin Jackson over to right tackle. That might make some sense. Speaking of Jackson, his old teammate, Alijah Vera-Tucker, who played left tackle this past year for USC. I think his best fit, though, as it relates to the NFL, is going to be guard. But being able to play left tackle, left guard, right guard, something he did all 3 spots at USC, does help his value. And I think he's a prime option at number 18 overall for the Miami Dolphins. You could make him a left guard. You could kick him over to the right side of the offensive line. With a unit overall that has quite a bit of positional flexibility and a lot more than what we're accustomed to seeing for a typical offensive line, that makes some sense. So Vera-Tucker not in play at all at number 3 overall, but if he's on the board at 18, that one does intrigue me quite a bit. The 4 sacks, 2 hits, 2 hurries, not great, but he was pretty solid this season. Next up is the center, Landon Dickerson out of Alabama. Had he not torn his ACL in the SEC title game, I think he would have been a borderline first-round lock. He was awesome this year for the Crimson Tide. No, by the way, he's played every single offensive line spot, although in the NFL, I think he's a center or a guard. Ted Karras is a free agent. If the Dolphins just want to find a way to get the best center in this year's draft class, I think Dickerson checks off that particular box. Now, there are some other prospects that I wanted to mention here. Not going to go too far in depth on them in terms of maybe they trade down from 18, or maybe they want to reach for somebody at that spot, like I would argue they kind of did with Austin Jackson last year. Samuel Cosmi out of Texas as a future left tackle. Jaylen Mayfield is well regarded by the NFL. I'm not as high on him, and some think, by the way, he might move to guard. Creed Humphrey is the other center there that certainly makes some sense. Liam Eichenberg at Notre Dame, probably a left tackle, so not sure how he fits that well with Austin Jackson. And then Tevin Jenkins as well out of Oklahoma State. He is a right tackle. I thought he fared pretty well this year. But if the Dolphins want to find an offensive lineman, well, there are plenty of options in round 1 for them to take a look at.